Okay, great. Okay, well, welcome to the October chapter of Caregiver Talk and Tools. I was just saying before we started recording that this month is going to be a little less conversational than some of our previous months. It's going to be a little bit more content forward. I just felt like it was a bit fitting given how much there is to say about the topic of grief and joy, and also as it relates to the space that we find ourselves in here. So let me introduce myself very briefly, just for anyone listening on the recording, so they kind of know where I'm coming from. So my name's Kara Ryska, and I have four children. And I have three typical children and one child who is 16 years old now, who was diagnosed with his first brain tumor at the age of 2. His second round of tumors at the age of 12. And starting at 2, we started to live a very alternative lifestyle, as in he had a whole handful of disabilities that were, in his case, acquired. But the lived experience is very, very similar and can relate to so many different types of people with disability or special needs or medical complexity, whatever like terminology you identify most with. So that started my personal journey. So I tell people I came, so at the time of my son's diagnosis, I was, a young mother, and I was pregnant with my third son. And I was now dealing with this very, very different life than I ever expected to have, very scary life. Um, and I did not have the tools to cope. Well, I should say, I did not have the tools to cope well, because I did cope because I'm here today. And so I would say that that for me started me down a trajectory of trying to learn what I needed to learn to discover who I was, to be able to hold everything I needed to hold for my children, and for myself. I think I talk in other places, and I know I've talked here in the acute syndrome community about the evolution of a special needs mom. And, we start hot and heavy. We start with survival. We start like, okay, we'll do everything. We'll do anything it takes. I think that is the beauty of being a parent, is that we dig so deep for the people that we love. And it has its ramifications. So the common experience is that of losing oneself, as they lose their identity that they had, and take on a more singular identity of being a caregiver to their child. And so that kind of is a little bit of an introduction to who I am. And actually, it's a great kickoff for the topic that we have today. And the official topic name is Grief as a Gateway to Joy. And it's funny. I find that when people hear the topic of grief, they're like, no thanks. I'd rather talk about something else. And I understand. But we're going to do a little bit of redefining grief today. Or maybe it's less redefining, but maybe it's broadening our perspective of what the grief experience is. So I guess I started, and I think most people I talk to start with expecting, or maybe putting grief in a little cute box of grief is for when somebody dies. It is when there is a life transition that is related to death. By raise of hands, does that feel like where you might have started with grief? Maybe you're not there now, but kind of where you started? Yes, no, yeah, right. So that's how we think about it. So it's almost like we reserve it for a very distinct time. And um, it's so much more than that. And it's interesting because as I have really dove quite deeply into the topic of grief and the area of grief, I feel like it's the thing that has brought, um, I don't know, it just kind of keeps opening doors. And it's a very helpful, it's to have a relationship with grief is very helpful in helping understand how we're feeling, and meet ourselves into into all the things that we need in those feelings. So let me kind of go back to my outline and not go off script too much. So first, what is grief? How do I define grief? And this is not just my definition. This is based on a lot of different authors and different, perspectives on grief. Firstly, simply defined, grief is the pain in response to loss. Now, when we think about that, we think, oh, okay, so loss can be disability, the loss of ability, that's a loss. A marriage, you think about a marriage dissolving, that's a loss. Financial loss, even just the transition from, like in my case, my children are 18 to 8 years old. So I am grieving the transition away from being a mom to little kids. I see the little kids and I feel the loss of that. In a way I don't think you can appreciate when you have little kids because when you're a little older, you like forget how hard it is, conveniently. So grief is the pain in response to loss. So I think like this is a bigger umbrella for like so many things now fit in the umbrella of grief. And another thing that I think is really helpful as we relate to grief is it's not about letting go as much as letting in. And so it's like so yes, we lose something. And so, but it's not about like, um, it's not about moving past something as much as it is letting in basically all the new world that we arrive in because of the losses that we have experienced. And then again, I want to just reiterate loss of expectation, right? So we all had an expectation of what our children would do and wouldn't do and what it would feel like to be a mom. And I can say for all of us, it's not going that way. It hasn't gone that way and it's not going to go that way. So we find ourselves in this new unfamiliar place and it is very disorienting. And back to what I said earlier, very, very common in grief is to lose our identities. It's almost like there's this picture of like, we thought we were going to, like, when I think about it, I picture like we thought we were going to this party that had all these cool things that we wanted to go to. We signed up to go. But instead of going into the party, we're ushered into a completely different room. And we're like, but we don't like this room. We don't know anything in this room. We don't know anybody in this room. So we find ourselves in this experience where we're alone. We don't want to be there. And we don't, oh, and it's a party. I can only tell you how many times I've tried to fix that on my Zoom, but this isn't even my room. Anyhow, I won't get distracted. Okay. Um, so, and then another just way of kind of reiterating what I have said, but in a different way, is loss isn't just about death and dying, but it's about the death of dreams. And I think that to me is like, oh, that makes so much more sense. Um, okay, let's keep going on. And I just want to mention this is not a comprehensive, grief is a topic that is so big, and I'm just kind of highlighting certain areas that I think are really helpful as a caregiver to start to think about. The other thing I want to mention is that many of us have heard of the 5 stages of grief. So denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. So this is, I think, the most popular language around grief. And it is still, I would say, the most widely accepted, even though I think what I have learned among the kind of, I want to say newer experts, but is that this was Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's research, and it was very specifically on one's experience approaching their own death. So it's a very narrow experience of that person's loss. It is not global loss. So many people try to apply these 5 stages to all grief. And maybe it's not as helpful because it's not super accurate for the experience of the broader experience of grief. So I think it's important to recognize like it is not limited to those 5 stages. And those stages are a little bit outdated as it comes to like all the aspects of grief. Another thing to mention, I think, is, if I had to picture grief before I did any of this work, I would have been like, oh, well, grief is constant sadness. That's what it is. Like it's only sad. And again, broadening it out, I think it is that, but it's also all of remember, if we look back to the pain experience with loss, there might be relief in grief. There might be joy. Well, there is joy. I should say, in the experience of the umbrella of grief. Oops. Um, Anger, regret. I mean, there's going to be so many parts of grief that don't all look the same for any one person and for any one aspect of that grief. And it's almost like I want you to consider that grief is not a feeling as much as it is, what's the word I'm looking for? A new way of living. So it's almost like there's this chapter that before the loss, and there's the chapter afterwards. And so this chapter afterwards, we're always going to have this loss as part of us. It's going to inform the rest of our life. And so that's going to include all of the aspects of it. So it's going to be the joy, the sorrow, the anger, all of the things I mentioned before. And again, just to kind of reiterate, it's not a timeline or period. And here's the thing I think important to recognize: grief does not end. There's not like, oh, we're done, all done. I think that a lot of times, again, out if you look at society, you look at perhaps what you would picture, who would have pictured as a grieving person. Maybe it's somebody, an elderly person that has lost their longtime spouse. Okay, well, we give them a year and then they can kind of move on, right? Like it's almost like we don't necessarily recognize that it's not a tidy and one and done kind of experience. Okay. Now, actually, I'm going to pause for any questions and comments before I go on to kind of the next section is the gift of grief, and that is joy. But I want to pause. It doesn't have to be any questions, but I just want to give some space if there is any comment or question. Raise your hand, come off mute. Okay, I think we're good. Okay. And take a drink of water. Okay. This picture that I came up with is um oftentimes the way that my mind works is I come up with images to try to describe the experience that we're having. And so this is an image that came to me as I was trying to articulate this how joy and grief are, I guess, related. And so I want you to picture like I guess we could go like the Grand Canyon or Zion. I think Zion's a better. Have you guys been to Zion? It's so cool. But it's like this big canyon and this beautiful river at the bottom. And it's obviously over many years has, the soil and rocks and all that have been eroded away. Um, and it can feel like if that experience can feel like it was destroying who we were or like that landscape, right? So if you have maybe we don't already know it's a beautiful canyon. Maybe it's like our backyard and we like just re-landscaped it. And then we have a rainstorm and it's like, the water is ripping away what we thought we wanted there. And so that is, I think, the idea of the loss, um, changing what was, changing the existence of how it is. And so we have these craters or these canyons, and sometimes they go deep. They go deeper than we thought that they could. And but what I almost want you to kind of picture is again back to kind of maybe the Grand Canyon or like Zion, who's just like this ginormous like space, is that those carvings or those empty spaces is what makes space for the depth of emotion that you now will get to have. And then that depth is making space for joy. So when you experience this deep, I'll call pain, suffering, sorrow, like when the moments that we reflect on what our children have had to go through, what they will have to go through, like that. For me, those feelings are the deepest feelings that I have. And again, it's like that it's driven me to go so much deeper. And then I have this capacity to feel joy because I have like this expanded capacity to feel all of the things. And so and we'll talk about this, like one of our temptations in grief, some of our temptations is to like capsulate, to protect, because these are big feelings. And what happens when we do that is that also it like makes everything smaller. So our joy gets very small. Our um, all of the things get very, very small. And sometimes there's seasons where we do that, and that is okay. But I'm looking kind of at the long term. So hopefully, hopefully my canyon thing kind of helps like the idea of like this evolving time of when you're going to expand and go deeper and deeper. And yes, it's really hard. So that there is this side, like that it is hard work. And there's also the side of it that I think is it's like when we get to know each other, know ourselves and community deeper, we get to be with each other in deeper, more intimate ways because of these spaces that have been carved out. Um, and I think a lot of actually, I know the name William Blank, but to be honest, I don't know who the guy is. Do you guys, William Blank, poet? Anywho, but he's famous and he's old. But what he said was, "The deeper the sorrow, the greater the joy." And I'm sure that's actually probably something you've heard that quote before, right? And so that kind of like reiterates the deeper the sorrow, the greater the joy. This is not a new invention that, I'm pointing to, but I think just kind of orienting our minds to it. Okay. So I think some fears that we have in grief, I want to just mention them, and then we're going to move into some temptations in grief. So, first, fears that we're going to get swallowed whole, that we are going to just collapse into this cavern and never come out. Because, again, these are very big feelings that we have. Um, and again, it's not just about the singularity of somebody passing away. Um, and so, kind of same, similar is like that there is going to be a sadness so deep that there is no end. So, if we engage in these feelings that feel so big and so deep that they won't end. So, I think this is a very common experience to say, if I open that door, it's going to go on forever. And it doesn't go on forever. I think that's where, it takes a lot of trust and a lot of vulnerability to experience these feelings. So, okay, going on to temptations in grief. Um, I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but it's like burying it, encapsulating it. Um, I think this is when we resist. And this is also, I want to mention, like, it's a temptation, and a lot of us fall into this, and that is okay. So the idea of bringing this up in this space is to notice if this is where we find ourselves, to meet ourselves with care and compassion, and to wonder what we need to be able to engage with that experience, with the feeling, with potentially the pain, and hopefully eventually the joy. Um, and again, there's seasons. So sometimes, we have very useful, what we call survival mechanisms. So when we're facing something quite hard, um, our nervous system intentionally turns off different parts of us to protect us. And so this is not a bad thing. It is a good thing. Where it starts to be problematic's not the right word, but when it starts to be maybe something a little less desirable is when it starts to like work when we don't want it to work, when it starts to kind of overdo its job. And that's when we find ourselves in these spaces where we feel numb, when we don't want to, when we're ready to engage, when we don't feel connected to people, when we feel very anxious all the time. So this is when we get to notice, okay, my survival mechanism, good job. But learning to engage and to kind of almost like manually turn it off, because again, it's typically a subconscious thing, but we can consciously recognize when it might be overdoing it. Another temptation in grief is trying to and or thinking we need to make things neat and tidy. Again, this is where, and this is like, I think probably the hardest part for me. Um, maybe the hardest, I don't know. There's a lot of hard parts. Um, is like, how do we show up, in society when we are just feeling utterly broken or alone or having whatever experience we're having? How do we do that when, the normal, like, you pass by somebody at school, it's like, hey, how's it going? Good. How's it going for you? Good. Thanks. Great for asking. Right. Like, where it's like this whole, like, we operate at this level. And actually, something had happened with my son about a month ago. and it was pretty bad. Not it, thankfully it was not health related. It was definitely behavioral related. But the next day I was at school and people were like, "Hey, how's it going?" And I literally was like, "Oh, it's going great. Thank you." I'm laughing to myself because I'm not going to have the conversation with them. I'm like, "Oh my gosh, if they had any idea." Um, and in this case, it was funny. But I think if it was in a, if the experience I had hit on different parts of my life, I think it would have been so disconnecting. And so, how do you engage when you're like, I can't open this part of my life to you, but saying I'm okay is completely inauthentic? Like, these are, I don't know. Like, I'm still struggling with this. But, and that's, I think we're having spaces like this, the cute syndrome community, where you guys are engaging in spaces to create belonging and tools and all of the things. And so I think even just identifying when we are trying to make things neat and tidy, when we're resisting leaning in into letting go, because I think that's what it require feeling big feelings requires us to let go of control and not to try to control and contain. And and it's a bit of a dance, particularly as if we're first engaging with this work. And then lastly, I think a temptation, I think speaks to, I think, the unfair expectations we have to grief. And that is like wanting to get to the other side, wanting to be done with it, wanting to like check it off the box and feeling like we're going to move past. And not, that doesn't mean that we don't get to places in grief that feel more like settled and like more homey. But kind of, trying to, get through it, that is going to actually create a lot more challenges in experiencing all the different aspects of grief. So, our last section here, let me scroll ahead. Okay. Our last section, now I lost my spot, my notes. Okay. Our last section, needs in grief. So this is like, okay, you're like, okay, Kara, I hear you. So what I am experiencing is grief. Um, and now what? Now what do we do? So this is kind of pointing toward like looking at different aspects to fill, like to ask yourself, what do I need? First one is being with people that can validate it. And this doesn't mean um, telling you that you are right for feeling the way that you are, but this just means saying I see you the way that you feel and acknowledging, like validating that this is how you feel. Um and I think one of the temptations, huge temptations back to that section is thinking that nobody will understand. And I think it's I mean, if you like Chandra, I know you're on screen, so I'm going to pick on you. Um, you probably have mom friends that have typical children or children that don't have any diagnosis. And so it's like it's going to be very easy to think they don't understand and they probably won't. And so then there's this whole cycle where then we start to feel very alone, like that we don't share with them. And so there's a cycle that kind of there's two things that happen. One, we don't share with them. So then they don't understand because they quite literally don't know. And that's kind of more where we can choose how we want to be about that. But then there's also the part where like they really just don't understand and recognizing that that's just not something that they can offer us. So it's then finding people and places that do understand. So there's kind of the different aspects of that. Um, yeah. So I think this is one of the most, and this, I think this is probably the loudest thing for, I mean, and actually it's interesting because, not related, but related to grief. One of my friends is losing her marriage, like a really dear friend. And so grief, right? Huge grief. And it's interesting because there's so many, parallels to our experience, not because I'm in the same situation with my husband, but because she feels alone. She feels like nobody understands. She feels like she doesn't fit in her old life anymore because now she does not have a husband. Now she doesn't have her kids with her all the time. And so that you see how disorienting it is. And again, that's why finding places that do help normalize your experience because they are actually experiencing it with you is very important, but also sharing with people so that they can understand. Um, okay. So another need in grief is to provide for the part of you that needs safety and security and to learn to live in the tension. And so recognizing that again, this speaks to like, as I mentioned, there's times and seasons in your life where you'll be surviving more than you might be actively engaging in grief. And so that's providing for the parts of you that need safety and security. Or even, I mentioned, there's this phenomena where kind of our old community doesn't understand as much and maybe they don't feel as safe because we might share with them something that we're experiencing. And rather than just being with us and holding that with us, they might say, well, have you tried this? Have you tried marijuana? Have you tried oils? Have you, they come, they come and want to fix. And then that experience is like, no, I don't need to be fixed. Like I'm doing that work. Like I'm doing the work to find something for my child. I just need to be seen. I need to be held and I'm scared and I feel alone. So it's like that's the part of you that needs safety and security. And so I think it's identifying, again, asking the question, what do I need right now? I need safety. I need security and finding that groundedness for yourself and what that looks like for you. So some people will be safe people and some people will become unsafe people for you, not because of necessarily anything that they have going on, but just because of what you need. And the part of learning to live within the tension, it's like, you know, there's this tension of like, yes, letting yourself be fully seen, be fully known, and all of those things, but also sometimes not. So there's like, there's not one right way to be. There's not one right thing to share. It's really living with the tension of what you need in the moment, in the day, in the season. Okay. Um, and I think so I'll mention also, because I know that Casey and the programs that you have really do provide these spaces, but um I will speak to Pathway to Peace, the program so it's called the coaching community that I host and I've created. And I think that what it is designed to be is a non-anxious, non-judgmental, comforting space. Like it's a place where you can come as you are, you can be as you are, and if you want to, you can engage in conversations to shift the experience you're having, but that's not necessary. Even the experience of coming as you are and being seen has tremendous value. And I know that the cute syndrome community definitely creates spaces like that. So well done. And are going to keep doing that. I know that they will. Um, okay. Uh, three more on this point. So, um, so third point in terms of your needs and grief and the need is to be held in your suffering. And I want to read a quote that I really love because I think it kind of helps bring this like picture, bring it to kind of what it looks like to be held in our suffering. And the quote is from an author named J.K. Park, who is he's an author, obviously, but he is a hospital, what's the word, chaplain. Um, and he said, the only way we can bear the unbearable is if we bear it alongside each other. And I'm like, that's it, right? So interestingly enough, like some people will have the capacity to hold us that don't have our common experience, and some people like will. Like, so this is not mutually exclusive, but I think that's the idea of to be held in your suffering is to be with people. So this could be by your therapist. That if someone is bearing this with you, knowing that you are not alone, that someone is just with you when you are in this experience, that is, I think, the thing that makes it like, okay, we can do this. Um, yeah. Okay. I think another one is to be able to tell the truth. Oh, this is such a juicy one because, like I was making fun of, this experience we have in our society, like, hi, how are you? Good, thanks for asking. And like, right, where it's like, that is not telling the truth. And I get it. We won't probably tell the truth there. But to be in a space where you can tell the truth, where you can say, uh, I don't know, I'm trying to think of something. Well, let's think about somebody who might have lost a parent who my friend also just lost her dad. Um, and he was hurting. He was in pain. So she experienced relief. And right. And so to have like to be able to say, like, I'm relieved my dad died. Like that is something that in some places or spaces you might feel like, oh, like what does that mean about me? Like I shouldn't be happy or I shouldn't be relieved. I shouldn't feel this way. So this is a very common experience. I shouldn't feel this way. I shouldn't feel the way I do. And so to be able to tell the truth is simply, this is how I feel. This is what I'm thinking. And to, again, kind of back to the like non-judgmental space is like, okay, it doesn't mean anything good or bad about you. It's just how you feel. Um, and how you're thinking and the thought. And it's almost like, I feel like sometimes these thoughts are like, the ones that feel, I think, particularly like, oh, we shouldn't feel that way. It's almost like they get louder and louder and louder. And then we start to feel like, wow, something's really wrong with us. And then when we share those things, it's almost like it fizzles out. Like, okay, now I don't have to hide that in shame. I've let it be seen. Oh, it looks like everyone's like accepts that part of me that feels this way. Okay. I don't have to focus on that anymore. I don't have to focus on the wrongness of how I feel. I can just feel the way that I feel. Um, oh gosh, this is such a good one. Okay, last need in grief is to let go of our obsession with productivity. Um, because if you take a high achiever, I know, right? I'm like the Casey, this is so good. If we take a high achiever and we go tell her, all right, go do grief, she's going to master that topic. She is going to nail it. And I know we're speaking to not just a female audience. But I think we can own the parts of us, also the praised parts of society that's like your production, your value is in what you produce. Okay, so that's a whole nother topic. But then when we add grief in there, usually we're not like nailing things with grief, right? Like that's not, it just is not what it's for. And so um we have to slow down sometimes. We have to let go sometimes. And all of these are like against productivity, as it's defined by general society. And so we have to let go of our obsession. And I think, I will say, I also think it is, there's a lot of beauty on the other side of letting go of our obsession of productivity, because also we recognize, oh, well, that's not where we get our value. That's definitely like my child is not valuable because they're productive. So it allows, I think, us to love and embrace our children in a much more profound way. And also one that makes space for us to love ourselves much better, much more deeply. Okay. So that's what we got today. So in terms of the talk part, um, we will probably wrap a little bit early today too, Casey, unless we want to keep talking. But I think I'll just open it up to what stands out to you, what like is new to you, what feels like is a good reminder. Maybe you've heard it before, but then it was a good reminder. So I know I just asked like 5 questions, but um, I guess the question I will stop talking on is, what are you taking from this? You don't have to share it either, by the way.
I was thinking a little bit I feel like I've done a lot of work around this, so I'm probably, a little bit in a different position than maybe some others. But an area that I think that we're struggling in is where do the dads go to be held in their suffering? Where do they go um, to kind of get this support? And so I see it a lot with moms. Moms coming
Hmm.
to these calls and reaching out for the community. But as far as like the dads, I think it's a little bit harder for them to find their support system, find somewhere where they feel comfortable to be held in their suffering, and so that's what was kind of on in my mind of like where could we maybe help with those supports as far as like on the community side, but because I feel like I have found my people where
Hmm.
I can just come and not feel like I have to show up. And I have, certain friends that I believe that even though they're not walking this life, they have
Hmm.
capacity for me to be able to be real and say those things without judgment. But I mean, Stella's 10. I've been on this journey for a while.
Yeah, I think it's actually, I was actually just talking about that with my husband last night. Because yeah, not to call him out, but he was calling himself out. Um, if we look at the hours invested in processing the emotions of what this life is, it's not equal. I'll put it that way.
Mhm,
And my husband also had come into our relationship with quite a bit of loss himself. Um, and there has been like some actual like major health ramifications of that for him. I mean, I can't prove it, but it is definitely we align and a lot of different practitioners align with like probably related. Um
mhm.
and yeah, I think actually it would be fun to talk about that, Casey, in terms of like how um yeah, creating a space that works for like dads and like understanding what's missing for them that doesn't have them showing up for this call. I mean, and it might even just start with like it's not the manly thing to do. Like it's like
Mhm,
what's it called? Conditioned in their mind
mhm.
that of how, a man is supposed to be. Um, so
Right. Chandra, you don't have to share if you don't want to, but I know that you're probably earlier on in this journey and might be, in a different place. It definitely takes some time. Um, and honestly, it took, I mean, Stella was probably 5 actually before I started even really kind of working on um myself and processing the grief and all of that. And it took quite a bit of time for me to kind of realize what it was doing to my mental health and to my body and all of those things.
Yeah, I think that I have been just running and going and trying to do the things, to take care of them that I
Hmm.
actually haven't even started to even process the grief. But I do love what Kara said about the letting go of the obsession with productivity because I've been feeling like I am a high achiever and I'm just like I feel like I'm like failing now in everything. I can't keep my house clean. I can't, do
Hmm.
anything, and so I thought that was really good.
it's so great. Well, I'm kind of laughing because, you know, we attract people similar to us in general. Like that's kind of how it works. And for so many people that I engage with, this is kind of the first thing that they've encountered that their smart, brilliant brain has not been able to figure out.
Yeah.
Or a couple things: their work ethic, their resources, and their brilliance. So they're like, wait, but the formula is I show up, I do good work, I'm really smart, I'm a hard worker, I can figure out anything, and it doesn't work. And
Hmm.
then that is the part where I think we're like, like what comes to my mind is a lot of heavy language, but I'll keep this clean. Is like, what do we do then? We're out of resources. And that is a very scary feeling. And I think that is the part where um, I think it's an opening for like, okay, like, so one, I think that it's probably guiding you to some acceptance. So I think that I didn't talk about it today because, again, this is not comprehensive about grief, but acceptance. Just actually letting what is be without trying to change it. And acceptance on death is a very different thing because it's like we relate to it as pretty permanent. Um, you like how pretty permanent. There are exceptions. Okay. But um but like a diagnosis or like a skill. Like so I'll use my son as an example. Um Walking has been he's walking. He is ambulatory most of the time. And so like where do we fall on like what do I need to accept? And like how does acceptance work with like advocating and like so again, this is like a whole other topic, but I think it is a very disorienting part of this aspect, especially as it relates to grief, because we're like, I don't even know if is it time to grieve? Are we accepting? Are we grieving? What are we doing? So you're right where you're supposed to be, Chandra.
Mhm.
Thank you.
And I
Right on,
think,
right on cue.
mhm. Yeah, I think it was also a little bit more difficult too whenever I would think of grieving because of course I love Stella just how she is and I don't want to change her. But I take away all the, all the medical complexities and all that if I could. Yeah, probably. But at the same time I want to love her and accept her for who she is. And so then it was like this conflict of my brain of is it safe to grieve, the child that I thought I was having while still loving the child that I have. And that was a bit of a mental struggle there for a bit.
Totally. I think I don't know if this is true for you, Casey, but I also feel like there's some pretty loud people out there that are like, I wouldn't change a thing about my child. This is who they are and how they are. Um, and so for me, because I would land it if I could take away my son's disabilities, I would in a second. Like absolutely in a second. Not even a question for me. Um, and so, but then someone, like me, who's like very much, I want to do what's right. I want to be accepted. I don't want to be rejected. Then it's like, oh crap, I'm doing it wrong. Like they're, like, so someone else, whether, I don't even know them necessarily, but like if I hear that I'm different than somebody else, it can be a little
Mhm.
disorienting. So I don't know if that's like at all similar for you, Casey, but um it is.
Yeah, it's just yeah, I want to be able to yeah, love and accept her for who she is. But yeah, if I could take away all the suffering and all the pain, then yeah, I believe I would.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. We entertain ourselves with these questions.
Right, yeah.
Like we have a choice.
Yeah.
But no, I do that with my husband. Like, if you could take away his behaviors or his medical stuff, like, what would you do? And I think it's just for us, it's more of a conversation of validating the difficulty
Mhm.
in some of
Right.
the aspects of him, of how he shows up. And I have my answer for that, but I won't share it. Okay. Well, any last comments before we wrap up? I feel like this is kind of a good place to land. And I guess the invitation is just to really pay attention to these needs and grief, and even sometimes, I think sometimes to try on labeling your experience and saying, this is grief. I am experiencing grief. And just to see how that lands. If it opens up some like space for you to like then acknowledge your needs, that's great. Try it on. It might not feel right, but again, it's like if you're on this call and listening to this recording, it's very likely you are experiencing some sort of loss, even if it's just loss of expectation. So, okay. Any last closing remarks for you, Casey?
No, I think that's it. Thank you so
Okay.
much for doing this 6-month process with us. And I'm going to have them all loaded up onto our website and all of the resources you provided us. So that way we can go back and listen if we need a gentle reminder or
Mhm.
if someone comes on, later to our community, they'll have this access. So, yes,
Wonderful.
thank
Okay,
you.
good. Thank you. All right. Well, then we'll see y'all soon. And thank you for coming. Thank you for investing in yourself, Chandra.
Mhm,
All right.
definitely.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.